Welcome to the deep dive. We cut through the noise, find the core details, and bring you what really matters. Today we're jumping into a really critical development, where international law meets human rights. A major update from the International Criminal Court, the ICC, involving a former head of state.
That's right. And this deep dive, it's focused squarely on the very high-profile case against Rodrigo Duterte, the former Philippine president, specifically looking at his administration's controversial drug war. This case has been watched very closely around the world. Huge implications for accountability, really, at the highest levels.
Right. And our mission for you today is to unpack two big things that happened pretty much at the same time. First, the ICC made this really crucial decision about Duterte trying to get some judges removed. And alongside that, we'll look at this huge new batch of evidence the prosecution just submitted. So by the end, you should have a really clear picture of what's happened, why it matters, and what's next. Okay, let's get into it.
Okay, so the big news landed on July 3rd, 2025. The ICC's plenary of judges, they came out with a unanimous decision. They formally threw out Rodrigo Duterte's request to disqualify two specific judges, Renan Alapini Gansu and Maria do Socorro Flores Liera, a very key procedural moment.
Okay, so Duterte's team wanted them off the case. What was the specific reason? I think I remember reading it was something about bias, because these judges had already ruled on the court's jurisdiction way back in 2021 when the whole investigation got the green light.
That's exactly it. That was the core of their argument. They were saying, essentially, these judges have already decided.
Yeah.
But the court's rejection was, well, pretty firm. And it sets a kind of precedent. They basically ruled that judges are expected to look again at legal questions when new arguments pop up. The Rome Statute, that's the treaty the ICC operates under, it actually recognizes that judges can, do their job at different stages of a case without it automatically meaning they're biased.
Okay, so it's built into the system.
Right. It's designed for continuity efficiency, too. You don't want to lose judicial experience just because someone ruled on an earlier point.
So basically, just doing their job at an earlier stage doesn't make them partial. That sounds, well, pretty fundamental for how courts work, especially these complex international ones, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
The ICC stressed its rules allow judges to rule on jurisdiction multiple times, and ruling before doesn't stop them from fairly looking at new arguments. They even said, quite directly, something like, the right to challenge jurisdiction doesn't mean judges who previously ruled on it must step aside. That's pretty clear.
It's crystal clear. And this unanimous decision, it's a big win for the prosecution. It removes a major procedural obstacle they were trying to put up. It really just clears the way for the ICC to keep moving forward with its investigation into these very serious allegations, the crimes against humanity claims tied to the drug war.
Okay, so that hurdle is gone. Let's maybe take half a step back. For listeners who might not have followed every detail, what exactly is the ICC looking into here? What are the core allegations?
Right. So the investigation is focused on alleged extrajudicial killings and other serious crimes that happened during Duterte's presidency. That was 2016 to 2022. We're talking about a period where thousands of people, according to reports, were killed in these anti-drug operations, often, without any real due process. Very grave stuff. Systemic violence is the allegation.
And we always have to remember that tricky jurisdictional point, don't we? The Philippines actually pulled out of the ICC back in 2019, but the court has said, hold on, we still have jurisdiction over crimes committed while you were a member, which covers that key period, 2011 to March 2019. So most of the alleged drug war crimes fall into that window.
That's a crucial distinction. You've nailed it. And throughout all this, Duterte has consistently denied everything. He calls it politically motivated. But what's really significant here is that he was actually surrendered, handed over by the Philippine government to the ICC back in March 2025. That itself was a huge step. It shows the international legal process really grinding forward.
So the disqualification attempt failed. What's the immediate next step for the case right now?
The very next thing is that the pretrial chamber, that's the specific group of judges handling this stage, they are set to rule on Duterte's main challenge to the court's jurisdiction. This is the big one. Does the ICC actually have the authority to prosecute him for these alleged crimes? That's the question they'll answer.
And if they say yes, if the court does confirm it has jurisdiction, what's the potential impact? How significant could this be?
Oh, historically significant. If jurisdiction is confirmed, the case could then move towards a full trial, and that would be, well, potentially the first ever prosecution of a former Southeast Asian leader by the ICC, a landmark moment for international justice, really. We haven't heard yet if Duterte's legal team plans to appeal this latest ruling on the judges, but the momentum certainly seems to be with the prosecution right now.
Okay, so while the judges were deciding on this disqualification issue, what was the prosecution doing? Were they just waiting or still building their case?
Oh, definitely not waiting. They were very busy. In fact, just a couple of days before the judge decision came out, on July 1st, the ICC deputy prosecutor, Mame Mandiainiang, made a really big submission, the 11th batch of evidence. And the amount of material, it's pretty staggering.
Staggering. How much are we talking about?
We're talking 1,062 items in total. That's not just a few documents. It's a massive collection. And they've carefully grouped it all, by different themes. It really shows the depth of their investigation.
Okay, let's maybe break down a few of those categories. Gives you a real feel for the scope, doesn't it? So 7 items related to the Davao Death Squad murder. That's from his time as mayor, right?
Correct. Pre-presidency allegation.
And then a really huge chunk, 435 items linked to barangay clearance operations. Can you remind us what those were exactly?
Yeah, these barangay clearance operations were basically anti-drug sweeps done at the very local neighborhood level, the barangay level, often during his presidency. And these specific operations have been heavily criticized, widely linked to allegations of, arbitrary arrests and extrajudicial killings. So this evidence presumably connects directly to those actions.
Right, and what else was in this big evidence drop?
Well, there were 64 items focused on high-value targets, specific individuals targeted during the administration, and significantly, 86 items dealing with modes of liability. Now, these are important because they explore the different ways people can be held responsible. So it might not just be the person who pulled the trigger, so to speak, but also those who commanded or encouraged or maybe aided the crimes. It could widen the net of responsibility.
Interesting. Plus, these 2 batches labeled contextual elements, 50 items and 101 items, I guess providing the bigger picture.
Exactly, the broader environment in which these alleged crimes took place.
But what really caught my eye was the mention of material that might actually help Duterte's defense. 6 items suggesting a line of defense, and 240 items with background info to help his lawyers prepare. That's there. Well, it's not what you might typically expect from the prosecution, is it?
No, it isn't always intuitive.
What does that tell us?
Yeah.
About their approach, maybe? Or about how the ICC works?
I think you've hit on a really critical point there. It's not just about being transparent, though it is that too. It really shows the prosecution's confidence. By handing over material that could potentially help the defense, what's called exculpatory material, or material helpful to the defense, they're essentially saying, look, here's everything. We believe our case is strong enough anyway, and we are absolutely committed to a fair trial. Yeah. It's actually required by the Rome Statute, this disclosure obligation. It speaks volumes about the thoroughness they're aiming for and the kind of institutional integrity required at the ICC. They seem to be building a very comprehensive case.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive then, we've seen these 2 really significant things happening almost in parallel. The ICC shut down Duterte's attempt to remove judges, clearing a big procedural path. And at the same time, the prosecution drops this massive load of new evidence, over 1,000 items, really showing the depth of what they're looking at. These are definitely crucial moves in a hugely complex and, frankly, historic international case.
Absolutely. And this case, it really matters to you, the listener, because it touches on these fundamental questions, doesn't it? International law, state sovereignty, but also, critically, accountability. Can leaders be held accountable for alleged mass human rights abuses? It's a powerful example of this global push for justice, even when it involves very powerful figures.
So as we finish up here, maybe something to think about. What is the ICC pushing forward so determinedly on this case? What does that suggest about how global justice might be changing? And, how could this case, whatever the outcome, reshape how we think about holding leaders accountable internationally in the future?